Good evening. Obviously, it is evening, at least now. We are on chapter 9 of Menace in the Goldilocks Zone. If you recall the end of chapter 8, Peregrine told Roger that there was an evil presence or a malignant intelligence on Kryptos, and that was going to make their quest, their goal of recovering the ancient artifacts a little more dangerous. So he demonstrated the use of a weapon, and which ostensibly he was giving to him to defend against strikes, which are uh, ambush predators on Mara Urba. Because Roger wants to venture into the grasslands to go to the river. So the chapter ends with Roger saying, "Why do I have the feeling that these, the weapons, are not only for defense against strikes?" "You're as astute as ever, my friend," Peregrine says, nodding. "I fear we will need them on Kryptos as well." "So much to look forward to," Roger notes grimly. So, without further ado, we begin chapter 9, River of Glass. Roger learns from Gray that the way down to the plain is on a switchback trail that takes an hour to go down and 2 to get back up. "Once you're down there, you'll see the pathway takes to the river," he adds. "If you leave before daylight, you can be back before the strikes get busy." Restless and irritable, Roger leaves that day, his third on Mare Urba. As he only intends to hike down the trail, rest, and hike back up, he packs a lunch of nectar fruit. He relates his plan to Gatherdam on his way to the trailhead. "Won't you need your weapon, sir?" she asks anxiously. "The grasslands are where the strikes hunt." Yes, I suppose that would be prudent," he replies testily, and returns to his compound to strap it on one of his forearms. The trip down is more difficult than he anticipated. While he is indeed complying with gravity's insistent tug, that tug at every step threatens to send him pell-mell down the incline trail and over the edge when the trail abruptly makes a 180-degree turn. He finds himself resting at every switchback, eyeing the trail above him with growing anxiety. He is determined, however, and continues down the trail, reaching the bottom 2.5 hours after he left. The grass is indeed high, the tops of the blades waving a good half-meter higher than his mantle. Many of the stalks are wider than his arms. The air is distinctly warmer and more humid, and Roger can indeed distinguish a path into the stems, one among many smaller paths that seem to radiate away from the plateau. The grass arches over the paths, creating tunnels of shifting and flickering light. It occurs to Roger that one could very easily get lost in there. The sun is high, the time of day when the strikes are said to be their most active. Not ready, or willing, to take on the ascent, Roger switches on his weapon and checks the setting. Per Peregrine's suggestion, it is on half power. He turns it down to 25% and activates the laser sight, thinking he would indulge in some target practice while he rests and enjoys the damp warmth. He looks around for a suitable target and sees a thick stalk of grass that appears to stand out from the others. It is nearly 4 centimeters wide at its base. Roger points the red dot at where the stalk meets the soil and discharges the weapon. The plant falls dramatically, its blades fanning like a plume of flame behind as it tumbles to the ground, the stump left behind smoking. Roger looks around for another suitable target after adjusting the setting to 10%. He is just pointing the laser sight at another 6 thick stalk when the wind, ever blowing, gusts strongly and blows a thick curtain of smoke across his field of vision. He turns toward the source and sees yellow and red flames creeping through the leaf litter beneath the stalks of the tall grass. He is momentarily panicked, envisioning the flames spreading and engulfing the entire grassland vista he beheld from the plateau. He moves swiftly to the fire, stomping on the flames with his 4 feet, grinding the sparks into the damp soil. He works furiously until the last ember is finally put out. He surveys the damage. An area of about 3 meters in circumference is covered in ash, the stalks of grass lightly charred. Deciding he has done enough damage for one day, he turns off the weapon and moves to ascend the trail. The fallen stalk lies across his path, and he picks it up. It is sturdy enough for him to lean on, so he strips off all the blades but those at the top, leaving a silver and green banner blowing in the wind. It is dusk as Roger drags himself up the last leg of the trail to the plateau. He pauses briefly at the top to look out over the plain at the river once again shining like gold. He turns dejectedly away and hobbles determinedly to his shelter. "Ah, there you are," Peregrine greets him as she emerges from her shelter. "We were about to send out a search party." "There's no need, as you can see," Roger says shortly as he positions himself over the gill chamber flushing device. "Well, I can see you had a rough day of it," Peregrine says soothingly. "Is that soot on your legs?" "Yes, and ash and mud. Now, if you excuse me, I would like to get some sleep." "Yes, of course," Peregrine says as Roger disappears into his shelter. The next morning Roger is awake with the dawn, but not up with it. He aches all over. He cannot recall being in this much pain since being in the dreads. He was certainly sore after a pitched battle with one of the giant creatures, but this degree of discomfort would only come after 10 such battles. He seriously considers staying in his shelter all day. That was not an option in the dreads, he reminds himself, and should not be an option today. He dons the communication hood and goggles, hobbles over to the gill flushing device, and inserts his gill wicks. He imagines himself feeling slightly better after that procedure and decides he could choke down some nectar fruit. The nectar gel looks more enticing, however, and he eats an enormous quantity of that. He is just coming to the end of his binge when Peregrine appears. "Are you feeling better, my friend?" she asks solicitously. "I still feel as if a dread has chewed me up and spit me out," Roger replies. "But I am better now that I have been rested and eaten." He takes another bite of nectar gel and looks at Peregrine as if he just noticed her. "Oh, where are my manners? Would you like some?" "No, thank you. I have already eaten." She watches Roger a moment. "Do you feel like telling me what happened?" "There's naught to tell," Roger says. "I simply hiked down to the grasslands, tried to set Mare Herba on fire, and thought better of it and hiked back up." "Sounds as if you took on too much too soon." "Perhaps, but I will take it on again tomorrow. Are we still leaving in 5 days?" Peregrine pressed her lips together. "No, the fuel has been delayed. The synthesizer is working, but only so fast. It seems we will be here for another 15 days after all." "Have you heard anything about Kryptos?" Peregrine shook her head. "The problem with staying off the beaten path is that you are off the beaten path. News doesn't get here often. I've heard nothing." "Well, if something calamitous had happened, we surely would learn of it even here." "Oh, I suppose you are right, my friend. I hope you are." She looks at Roger. "What are your plans for today?" "Rest, paint, and apologize to Gray Whiskers and Silver Ears for the damage I wrought with that weapon of yours." "Ah, the fire. Now I understand," Peregrine replies. "Did you see a strike?" "No," Roger says dryly. "There was nothing down there but grass and a bored cerulean." "All the same, Perhaps you should take someone with you next time. All I'm doing is hiking down and hiking right back up to get my strength back, Roger replies impatiently. I think I can take care of myself that far. Yes, I'm sure you can, Peregrine rejoined soothingly. But I'd hate to have you eaten. I'm quite fond of you, you know. I assure you, Roger replies, only a bit mollified by the sentiment, I will take great pains for your sake not to be eaten. Now, if you'll excuse me, I need to find Gray and fess up. Of course. Gray is not easily found. Roger encounters both Gatherdam and Larderson at the burrow entrance as they are helping their hosts harvest the fungus root. Gray, Gatherdam reports, is deep in the burrow packing the food stuff in shipping containers in anticipation of the delayed transport. Shall I fetch him for you, sir? She asks. No, there's no need to interrupt his business, Roger replies, just as Silver Ears appears from the burrow. Ah, madam, Roger addresses her. Do you have a moment? I've got several, she replies. What can I do for you, Mr. Roger? Roger guides her away from the two other Mayor Urbans for a private conversation. I'm afraid I owe you and Mr. Burrowson an apology, he says finally. Oh, she says curiously. How's that then? I went down to the grasslands yesterday and got a bit careless. Oh? Yes, I'm afraid I set a fire with my weapon. Accidentally, of course. I put it out, but I burned about 10 square meters of your grassland. I'm very sorry. Silver Ears looked at Roger severely. You burned 10 square meters of grassland? Yes, Roger admits sheepishly. Perhaps a little less, but yes. Syl cannot control her mirth any more and laughs. Oh, Mr. Roger, she says finally. 10 square meters is but a seed in a kilo of seeds, in 100 kilos. Lightning strikes in the dry season burn 1,000 times that. She stops laughing and becomes conciliatory. Don't fret about it, Mr. Roger. You've done no harm and may have done some good. The grass always comes back stronger and more productive after a burn. Oh, well then, good, Roger replies with a mixture of relief and embarrassment at being so foolish. I wouldn't want to do anything that would compromise your livelihood. You've done nothing of the kind, she reassures him. Did you see a strike then? No, Roger replies, not meeting her gaze. I was target practicing. Did you hit your target? Yes. Well, there's that then. Silver Ears looks at him. Is there anything else you need? Actually, Roger says, an idea just occurring to him, I did want to ask you how you get around in the grasslands without getting lost. When I sail on Cerulia, I have the sky and the currents to help me navigate. Being on those trails is almost like being underground in a burrow. Well, we knows those trails like we were born to 'em, Gray and me, Syl says thoughtfully. She ponders his question a moment longer. Yes, a compass would work, she muses to herself. What you need is a compass, Mr. Roger. A compass? Yes, it's a gizmo. She pauses, looking for a better word. A tool that tells you what direction south is. It works underground, so it should work in the grasslands. How do you make this gizmo? Now that I can't tell you, Mr. Roger. That's beyond my feeble brain. We might have one lying about from when we dug our burrow, but I'll be a strike bait if I know where it is. Well, perhaps Peregrine will know how to make one, Roger says. Thank you, madam. You have been most helpful. Think nothing of it, Mr. Roger. I'll ask Gray about the compass, but I wouldn't put any hopes there. Roger returns to his shelter, hoping to find Peregrine. Not finding her, he walks toward the east, where he finds Foragedem fussing over a machine with many tubes and pipes sprouting from it. Just beyond that, Roger sees Exile, Peregrine's vessel, partially draped under an enormous and randomly patterned tarp. Captain, Roger greets her happily. I thought you had gone off. I haven't seen you since we arrived. Good morning, Admiral, Foragedem replies. No, I've been trying to coax some more efficiency out of this contraption. What is it? A fuel synthesizer. An ingenious device, really. Makes fuel out of air and water. Takes its own sweet time in doing so, though. Aren't we getting a shipment of fuel soon? Yes, but there won't be any such shipments on Kryptos. Oh, I see. Of course. Roger eyes the synthesizer, unable to make any sense of what he's seeing. He gives up. Say, he asks finally, is Peregrine about? She's on her vessel, working on another machine we'll need on Kryptos. Thank you. Roger wanders over to the Exile and finds Peregrine just inside the open cargo door. She is bent over what looks like a large dish, similar to the one Roger used to boil seawater down to the salts, except that it is metallic. Braces from the rim hold a large crystalline structure in the center of the dish. Peregrine appears to be connecting a large cable to the convex side of the dish. What marvelous device are you constructing now? Roger asks as he walks into the cargo hold. Peregrine is startled and practically jumps erect. Oh, hello, she says, relief evident in her demeanor. It's something we'll need on Kryptos, hopefully not before. As for being marvelous, it's not the word I would choose. Roger detects grim resignation in her bearing and decides to change the subject. How does one make a compass? Peregrine tilts her head to one side. A compass? Why do you want to make a compass? I need a compass to navigate those seas of grass, Roger replies simply. Back home I can use the sky, winds, and currents to navigate. Moving through the grass is like moving underwater. Peregrine appeared to consider her response. I'll be honest, my dear, I'm tempted to evade your question. Why are you so determined to go wandering about in the grass? I want to visit the river, Roger explains. I've lived my entire life near water. Though it is not a sea, I think standing at the river's edge will do me some good. The river calls to me. Peregrine nods. I'm sorry. I've come to realize how difficult this trip is for you. What a sacrifice I've asked of you. She presses her mouth together in one of her eloquent expressions, a kind of cross between the happy upward curve of the mouth and the sad downward curve. I cannot deny you what comfort you can have, she says finally, and points to the tablet strapped to Roger's upper right arm. You need not make a compass. You have one right there. What? Roger exclaims, looking at the tablet, which up to now he considered simply part of the communication device he wore. This is a compass? Peregrine shakes her head in another of her eloquent gestures. Among other things, she says. May I? Roger holds out his arm with the tablet and watches as she touches an image looking like a multi-pointed star. The screen becomes full of an image with the cerulean symbols for the cardinal points arranged in the perimeter and a directional arrow pointing, amazingly enough, to the south. Roger turns in place and watches the arrow consistently points south. What else can this thing do? He asks in wonderment. It's primarily a communication device, Peregrine replies patiently, but it can perform other simple functions. Simple? This is amazing, Roger says, still turning about. Do you know how to use it and contact one of us? Roger stops embarrassed. I used to. Peregrine takes his arm and shows him how to return to the original screen. Press this, she says, indicating an image of a tablet. Roger does, and a list of cerulean characters appears on the screen, listing the names of Peregrine and the Mare Urbans. This tablet detects the presence of other such devices in the vicinity, within 100 kilometers, Peregrine explains. Touch the name, and it will activate the device of that person. Roger touches Peregrine, and after a moment he sees her image on the screen. He touches the red cross, which he now recalls ends the connection. So if you insist on going to the river alone, Peregrine says pointedly, please remember how to do this. And bring my weapon, Roger adds. Yes, of course. When do you think you'll go? Oh, not for several days, now that there's less urgency. I need to get more strength back. That is wise. Just let me know when you decide to go. Certainly. Well, I will leave you to your work. Will I see you at the evening meal? Yes, I'm sorry I've been so cross. Don't concern yourself, Peregrine admonishes. Just come eat with us. Roger activates the compass as he walks back to his shelter to rest, still marveling at how the arrow consistently points south. Roger spends the next several days hiking down the trail, resting and hiking back up. The soreness begins to dissipate after his fourth trip, and once he can accomplish the round trip in less than 4 hours, he informs Peregrine and his Mare Urban friends at the evening meal that he intends to go to the river the next morning. Peregrine acknowledges the news with a resigned nod. Only Gatherdam cannot suppress her misgivings. Must you go, Mr. Roger? The strikes are not creatures to be trifled with. Yes, Admiral, Foragedem adds, emboldened by her crew person. Whether you think so or not, you have proven yourself invaluable to this expedition. Is the risk worth it? I assure you, Captain, I assure you all, Roger replies, looking around the table. I will be worthless to this expedition if I do not soon stand at a water's edge. I cannot explain it, but it is something I must do. As for the risk, well, I have a weapon and experience. I remind you all that I am no stranger to dealing with dangerous creatures. And as for being accompanied, he looks pointedly at Peregrine, I cannot in good conscience ask anyone to share that risk. There are no further remonstrations, but as the group breaks up to rest, Larderson pulls Roger aside. The strikes fear fire, he advises. If you carry some kind of flame, that will give you a wide berth. Thank you, Roger says sincerely. That is good advice. He spends a restless night, a restlessness shared by the weather as he sees lightning flashes light up the sky and various parts of his shelter flap in a strong wind. No rain falls, however. He finally gives up on sleep and sets out for the river under a bejeweled sky of scudding clouds. He packs enough blossom fruit and nectar gel for several meals, as he has learned that Gray's time estimates are more than a bit optimistic. He moves down the trail confidently as he has excellent night vision and more than a passing knowledge of the path. He is still fatigued when he reaches the bottom, but not as exhausted as he was on that first trip. He snacks on a piece of nectar gel as he rests briefly. Paths into the grass are even darker tunnels than they appeared in the daylight. He considers Larderson's suggestion, but determines that a flame's comparative brightness would only impair his vision. And then there's the comforting thought that the strikes are thought to be active only in daylight. He activates the compass on his tablet and turns on his weapon. The river is due west. The path is indeed like walking through his Mare Urban host's burrow, complete with grass-stalk-lined walls. Small shadows seem to scatter at his approach, and when the grass canopy opens above him, he sees tiny glowing yellow points of light among the stalks of grass. The larger path has several smaller ones branching off it at intervals, and though it appears to meander somewhat, the main trail holds to a predominantly western course. The sky is just getting light when Roger suddenly steps into a break in the foliage to behold a broad floodplain. The river is still 30 meters off, the ground in between consisting of sandy embankment. Roger looks up and down the river, and seeing more of the same, proceeds across the soft sand to the water's edge. The water is transparent, every detail of the bottom visible down to the faintest ripples in the sand. Roger removes his haversack and walks toward the river. Small aquatic creatures dart away from his shadow as he wades in and feels the moderate but persistent current pushing him downstream. The water is also cold, almost bitterly so, but Roger continues to wade until he is standing with the river's surface just under his lower pair of arms. He longs to lower his gilwicks, but knows that this is fresh water, and doing so will make him ill. He stands very still, hoping to get a better glimpse of the animals in the river. Instead, he notices bits of bright color in the sand, aquamarine, ruby, pale yellow, emerald green, and even cerulean blue. He turns to look upstream and spots a bed of pebbles and larger stones of varying hues. He wades carefully against the current until he reaches the bed of pebbles, and using his lower arms reaches under the water to collect some. They are round to ovoid in shape, and all are beautifully clear and translucent. He holds them up to the light of the morning sun and admires the purity of the light coming through them. He wades to the sandy embankment and his haversack. After eating a quick breakfast from the haversack's contents, he arranges it across his upper arms and wades back to the pebble bed. The sun is high when he determines that he has collected all the translucent pebbles he can carry. He turns to wade to the embankment when he spots a small furred animal hopping cautiously to the water's edge. It is an unlikely-looking creature with large, long hind limbs and long, erect ears paired with branching horns of some kind. Eyes are wide and positioned on either side of its head. It stands at the river for a moment or two, ears turning this way and that, before lowering its head to drink briefly, before picking its head up again to survey its surroundings. It does this several times before turning its back to the river and carefully hopping back to the curtain of tall grass. Roger is frozen with fascination as he watches the animal make its way back across the sandy embankment. The creature is about to disappear into the shadow of the grass when it suddenly appears to leap straight up as a gray-green blur explodes from the grass. The small animal hits the ground and is gone into the grass. Left on the embankment is an animal about the size of an adult mare urban. It crouches down on all fours, its body covered in scales that appear to alternate between pale green and a light gray in a brindle pattern. The head is about 1/3 of the length of its trunk, and features large pale green eyes with vertical slit pupils like the Iridian's eyes. Its snout, in contrast to the Iridian's, is long and toothy, and the creature carries a tail as long as its head and trunk combined. A gray tongue flicks out of the end of its mouth, and the animal appears to be content to lie in the sun, its eyes half closed, as consolation for its escaped meal. That, Roger thinks to himself, is a strike. He had witnessed the Wild Kingdom drama still immersed to his lower arms in the river, afraid to move lest he attract the predator's attention. He is mulling over his options when the river decides to throw in its 2 cents by exerting a stronger current and beginning to rise. The water, too, becomes cloudy with stirred sand and silt. The storms in the mountains, Roger realizes. For its part, the strike appears unconcerned with either the rising river or Roger's plight. Roger grows increasingly anxious as the river rises, and he has to raise his upper arms to keep his tablet and weapon out of the water. The weapon, Roger realizes with a mixture of relief and consternation at not thinking of it before. It is still on from his walk through the grass. He activates the laser sight and points it at the trunk of the strike and fires. The strike jumps sideways, writhing. Roger sees that he had left the setting on 10% and dials it up to 25 and moves toward the embankment. The strike, now aware of Roger, stands its ground and opens its tooth-spiked mouth in what Roger's goggles tell him is a loud hiss. Roger points the laser sight at the end of the animal's snout and fires. The strike responds in a paroxysm of writhing and rolling, scattering sand and debris in a wide circle. It finally finds its feet and turns to confront Roger again, who raises his arm to fire once more, only to see the beast flee into the grass. The water continues to rise rapidly, and the current has become so strong as to threaten to topple Roger off his 4 legs. He moves determinedly through the river, finally climbing onto the rapidly disappearing embankment. Roger points his weapon toward the opening in the grass and proceeds with all deliberate haste into the leafy tunnel. His eyes adjust quickly to the flickering shadows and looks intently up the path, sweeping the edge of the grass with his laser sight. He moves cautiously until it recalls Larderson's advice. He returns the weapon setting to a 10% and fires a blast into the ground litter 10 meters ahead of himself. A small, smoky fire results, which is still rather small as Roger passes, stomping it out. He fires another shot into the ground litter ahead, and so goes on clearing his path of strikes by starting and extinguishing fires as he walks. At one point he thinks he sees a gray tongue flicking out from the grass as he rounds a turn, and he fires at the ground at that spot. He approaches the fire cautiously, but is unmolested as he puts it out. It is with no small amount of relief that Roger stands at the base of the plateau and contemplates the arduous hike back up the switchback trail. He pauses for another meal of blossom fruit, looking back into the dark tunnel in the grass, now hazy with lingering smoke. There is something very familiar about the experience of walking cautiously through shifting and flickering light, something that stirs a primordial memory. In an instant, Roger recalls walking on the bottom of the nursery lagoon, about to emerge to a terrestrial life, fearful yet determined to leave the water. In another moment, the memory and the feeling is gone. He turns to look up the trail to see a large V-shaped craft fly over it as it descends to the plateau. Roger assumes it is the expected transport bearing the fuel and is glad he had not delayed his hike to the river another day. The fuel having arrived, the plateau becomes a hive of activity. Cargo from the Exile is loaded on Forge Dam's vessel, as are the two contraptions she and Peregrine had been tinkering with, and everyone is scouring the area for personal effects that may have become scattered. Roger's safe return from the river is barely acknowledged, although he's prevailed upon by Forge Dam to provide some nectar gel for a feast of thanks to Grey Whiskers and Silver Ears. And Larderson, the captain adds, turning on her crew member, do you suppose you and Gatherdam can spare a few liters of that nectar wine? Larderson looks as if he has just swallowed an entire fungus root without chewing. Oh, come now, Larderson, the captain admonishes amiably. Surely you don't think I was never a junior crew member on a freighter? There's nothing you can think of to do that I haven't already done. Yes, ma'am, Larderson manages to say. So we can expect some nectar wine? Forge Dam coaxes. Yes, ma'am, is still all poor Larderson can say. You'll still have plenty to sell to the Arborians, the captain says consolingly. Yes, ma'am. This time the response is tinged with resignation. For his part, Roger returns to his shelter to pack his belongings and retrieve some nectar gel and blossom fruit before the containers get stowed on the Mare Urban freighter. He's about to pack the colorful, translucent pebbles when he changes his mind. That might make some interesting dinner conversation. Nauerdam appears to report that everyone is to sleep aboard the freighter. The captain wants to take off at the first stroke of first watch, she explains. She helps Roger empty the shelter and fold it up. I am also to collect your weapons, she says. Peregrine wants them stowed away safely for the voyage. Of course, Roger says, unstrapping his from his upper arm. I don't think we'll be encountering any strikes in space. Larson appears with loading equipment and takes the containers of Roger's possessions. The area is left empty, as if Roger had never been there. The dinner is held out under the stars, very much a novelty for the Mare Urbans. Peregrine enhances the romantic mood by lighting the table with torches on long stakes driven into the ground. Grey Whiskers and Silver Ears are almost speechless at the gesture, but a sip or two of nectar wine loosens their tongues, and they begin to tell stories of their youth and adventures of establishing their farm. They begin to make a fuss over Roger's nectar gel, when Silver Ears stops and asks, Did you get yourself a compass then, Mr. Roger? And did you make it to the river? Yes, he replies, I went this morning. And did you see any strikes? Gatherdam asks. A tiny one, Roger replies. I ran him off. Sounds like an uneventful day, Forgeden observed skeptically. Did you see anything else? There was a small creature with long ears and horns, Roger says. It came to the river to drink while I was there. Oh, you must have been very still, Silver Ears says, obviously impressed. That was a grass hare, and they're skittish things. We've only seen 6 or so, Grey and me, in all our years. I also found these, Roger says, pulling some of the clear pebbles from his haversack and putting them on the table. Oh, river glass, Grey says, almost dismissively. There's some that likes that sort of thing. I think they're beautiful, Roger says, taken aback by the general indifference displayed by the group. The colors are astonishing. Well, there you are, Mr. Roger, Silver Ears says. We don't see colors the way and some others do. Oh, what a shame, Roger says sincerely, struck by the genuine pity for his hosts and traveling companions as he returns the glass to his haversack. "They're volcanic glass," First Officer Burrowson explains to Roger. "These mountains," he gestures vaguely to the east, "are ancient volcanoes. The rivers here are full of that glass. I guess it washes out of the mountains." "There's some who say the Arborians will pay handsomely for river glass," Gray observes, by way of consoling Roger. "You'll make some money on that there, I'm sure." "What?" Roger is once again taken aback, as his motives for collecting the glass were aesthetic and far from mercenary. "I don't want to sell them." "They do make beautiful souvenirs," Peregrine speaks up reassuringly. "Well, friends," Forage Dam says reluctantly, "it is late, and we begin a long journey tomorrow." She addresses Gray Whiskers and Silver Ears. "Thank you for your hospitality, and for looking after my friend's vessel while we are gone." "It's us who need thank you," Silver Ears replies. "It's been a diversion, to be sure, and we're happy to keep Peregrine's vessel safe and out of sight," Gray Whiskers adds. "Thank you," Peregrine says to the two of them. "She is my second home, and I feel content knowing that she will be well looked after." Lutterson and Fordson begin clearing the remains of the meal under Gatherdam's direction, as Peregrine accompanies Roger back to the freighter. They are about to enter when Roger stops and stares into the hold. "How long is the trip to Arborea?" he asks. "About 50 days, Peregrine replies. "Our delay has had one positive effect at least. It has allowed Mare Erba to catch up with Arborea." 150 watches, Roger says determinedly. "Let it begin." That's the end of chapter 9. The next chapter is chapter 10, Inconspicuous. Thanks for watching.